48,000 pounds of chicken, 10,500 pounds of lettuce, 600,000 cups of coffee. That's just a fraction of what it takes to feed the crew of a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier for a single month. But here's the kicker. They have to do this every month for deployments that can last up to a year in the middle of the ocean. Over 100 Navy cooks work in shifts, their hands moving in a constant blur of chopping, stirring, and plating. They're not just cooking. They're orchestrating a symphony of flavors and nutrition that keeps the ship's heart beating. Now picture this, 17,000 meals. That's how many these culinary wizards whip up every single day. It's not just about quantity, though. Each meal is a carefully planned operation, timed with military precision. One misstep, and you've got thousands of hungry sailors on your hands. No pressure, right? Speaking of pressure, let's break down what it takes to feed this floating army. Every day, the kitchen goes through a mind-boggling 1,600 pounds of chicken. That's like cooking up 800 whole birds. And if you think that's impressive, hold on to your chef's hat. They also plow through 350 pounds of lettuce, ensuring our sailors get their greens even in the middle of the ocean. But here's where it gets really interesting. Do you know how much coffee it takes to keep a carrier running? A whopping 20,000 cups every single day. That's enough to fill a small swimming pool. Imagine being the poor soul in charge of brewing all that joe. Now, storing all this food is a whole other ballgame. The carrier's storage facilities are like a maze, stretching across multiple decks. Picture walking into a room packed floor to ceiling with cans, boxes, and freezers. It's like a supermarket exploded inside the ship. Here's where the tension really builds. One mistake in this delicate balance of supply and demand could spell disaster. Run out of chicken, and you've got 5,000 disappointed sailors. Forget to order coffee, and you might as well have forgotten to fuel the ship. But don't worry, the Navy's got a secret weapon. The 2-week meal rotation system. It's like a giant floating puzzle where every piece has to fit just right. This system keeps everything organized, ensuring there's always enough food to go around, no matter what the sea throws at them. And just when you think you've got a handle on how impressive this operation is, there's more. Fresh food on a ship is like gold, rare and precious. But what happens when you're months into a deployment and the lettuce runs out? The Navy's solution is nothing short of a mid-ocean miracle. When an aircraft carrier first leaves port, it's a sight to behold. The walk-in freezers aren't just full. They're packed to the ceiling with boxes upon boxes of food. It's like a giant game of Tetris, but with frozen chicken and vegetables instead of colorful blocks. And here's the kicker. For the first few weeks, the cooks have to literally crawl through tiny spaces between the boxes just to reach the supplies they need. Can you imagine trying to find that one box of peas you need for dinner when you're surrounded by a maze of frozen food? But don't worry, the Navy's got a system. They've got these detailed maps plastered on the freezer doors that show the exact location of every single ingredient. It's like a treasure map, but instead of X marking the spot for buried gold, it's telling you where to find the buried broccoli. And get this, it takes a full 8 weeks before enough boxes are used up that the cooks can actually walk normally in the freezers. Talk about a workout. Now, as time goes by, those fresh fruits and veggies start to disappear. The salads get a little less crisp, and suddenly that can of peaches is looking pretty good. But just when you think you're doomed to a life of frozen peas and canned corn, in comes the cavalry, or should I say, the replenishment ships. These floating supermarkets bring in a whopping 400,000 to 1 million pounds of supplies. That's right, we're talking about enough food to feed a small city. And here's where it gets really cool. Every 7 to 10 days, helicopters swoop in like giant mechanical seagulls, transferring fresh food right in the middle of the ocean. It's like getting a grocery delivery, but way more epic. But wait, there's more. The Navy doesn't just rely on these mid-ocean resupply missions. When they're in port, they stock up big time. We're talking about cramming in up to 70 days worth of food before they even leave the dock. It's like your mom telling you to pack extra snacks for a road trip, but on a massive scale. And speaking of massive, let's talk about the emergency backup systems. These aren't your average refrigerators. We're talking about specialized cooling units and temperature-controlled environments that would make a 5-star restaurant chef green with envy. They've got backup cooling units and power supplies that kick in if anything goes wrong. Because let's face it, when you're in the middle of the ocean, you can't exactly run to the corner store if your fridge breaks down. Ever wonder what it's like to eat on a floating city that never sleeps? On a US Navy aircraft carrier, mealtime isn't just a challenge, it's a 24/7 culinary marathon. These massive ships operate on an 18-hour schedule, throwing traditional meal times right out the porthole. But don't worry, the Navy's got a solution that'll make your head spin. Imagine a world where breakfast, lunch, and dinner are just suggestions. That's life on an aircraft carrier. The kitchens never close, churning out 4 main meals a day to keep the crew fueled up and ready for action. You've got your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, sure. But then there's the secret weapon in the Navy's culinary arsenal, the infamous MIDRATS. What's MIDRATS, you ask? It's short for midnight rations, and it's a lifesaver for the night crew. These night owls live in a topsy-turvy world where dinner might be at 6 a.m. and breakfast could be your bedtime snack. The MIDRATS meal is their lunchtime, smack in the middle of the night when most of us are dreaming about food instead of eating it. But here's where it gets really interesting. On these floating fortresses, not all meals are created equal. Remember in high school when the cool kids had their own table? Well, the Navy's got its own version of that. Junior enlisted sailors chow down in general messes, filling their bellies without emptying their wallets. But climb up the ranks, and suddenly you're living in a world of culinary luxury. Officers get to choose from a wider array of menu options, but there's a catch. They've got to pay extra for the privilege. It's like having a gourmet restaurant right next to the cafeteria, and you get to decide which one you want to hit up. And if you think that's fancy, wait till you hear about the captain's setup. The big boss gets their own personal cook and a separate galley stocked with the cream of the crop. Talk about perks of the job. Now, you might be wondering how they manage to cook for thousands of people all at once. Well, it's all about divide and conquer. Each cook is assigned to specific groups. Some might be whipping up meals for 100 officers, while others are cooking up a storm for thousands of enlisted sailors. It's like having a bunch of restaurants all under one very big, very mobile roof. But what happens when special occasions roll around? Do sailors get to celebrate birthdays with cake? Is there a special menu for holidays? And how do they keep morale high when you're eating the same rotation of meals for months on end? You might think life at sea means saying goodbye to birthday cakes and holiday feasts, but the Navy's got some tricks up its sleeve that'll make your jaw drop. Ever heard of a floating grocery store? Or a barbecue party on a steel beach? Let's dive into how the Navy keeps spirits high when you're miles from land. Imagine you're celebrating your birthday on an aircraft carrier. You might expect a sad cupcake with a candle stuck in it, but nope, the Navy goes all out. Special deliveries arrive for birthdays and holidays, bringing a taste of home to the middle of the ocean. And we're not talking about just a cake. We're talking fancy table settings, wine glasses, and meals that could rival a high-end restaurant. It's like a 5-star dining experience, but with fighter jets roaring overhead. Now, let's talk about something called a steel beach picnic. It's not a new metal band, I promise. These are rare occasions when the crew gets to enjoy a good old-fashioned barbecue. Picture this. You're on the flight deck, the sun's shining, and the smell of grilled burgers is in the air. It's a chance for sailors to kick back, relax, and forget for a moment that they're floating on a massive warship. But what happens when a port visit gets canceled? You'd think morale would take a nosedive, right? Well, that's when the Navy pulls out the big guns. And by guns, I mean steaks and lobsters. Nothing says, sorry, you can't go ashore, like a juicy steak or a succulent lobster tail. It's the Navy's way of saying, we got your back, sailor. Speaking of keeping things fresh, the Navy doesn't let its cooks get rusty. When the ship's in port, it's time for training sessions. These aren't your average cooking classes. We're talking about sharpening existing skills and learning new techniques. It's like culinary boot camp, making sure the cooks are ready to whip up delicious meals no matter what the sea throws at them. Now, here's something that'll blow your mind. Grocery stores at sea. They're called food sea lions. And they're not just a cute name. These floating markets let sailors shop for their favorite items, bringing a slice of normalcy to life at sea. Want some chips? Craving a specific brand of cookies? Just head down to the Food Sea Lion. It's like a little piece of home, right there on the ship. But here's the thing. Every single meal prepared aboard an aircraft carrier isn't just about filling bellies. It's about fueling the entire operation. Each plate that leaves the kitchen plays a crucial role in keeping the crew's morale high and making sure they're ready for whatever mission comes their way. The kitchen isn't just feeding people, it's keeping a floating city running at peak performance. Let's talk about those 17,000 meals a day on an aircraft carrier. They're not just filling bellies, they're fueling the entire mission. The Navy sails on its galley, with culinary specialists keeping the whole operation afloat. Good food boosts morale, which is critical for success. The Navy's always upping its culinary game. They've got plans for ongoing training, teaching their chefs new techniques and skills. Imagine being thousands of miles from home surrounded by ocean. A familiar taste or well-prepared meal can make all the difference. Those Navy chefs are out there, cooking up a storm for thousands, adapting to meet sailors' demands and keeping morale high. Next time you're making dinner, think about them. They're the unsung heroes keeping our sailors fed and focused, ready for anything that comes their way.